Welcome everyone to this first TCoP for 2022. Naomi has worked really hard to bring you a wonderfully SDG themed TCoP today, and we have some fantastic presenters joining us. We'll just begin the session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. And I'm going to hand over to Robert Hales, who's going to present first for us today. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And we have our panellists up there on the screen there. We had a last minute change and Rachel has kindly offered to jump in and talk about her experiences in the first year in Foundations, teaching in 2 courses today. So I'm talking about SDGs. So what I thought I'd do today is start big picture and then we can go down narrow in with the other speakers. So as many of you know, myself and others in the room here and online have been working over the years to advance sustainability, and it's always an ongoing work in progress to try and get there. I mean, if we think about sustainability transition, and some people are researching this in the room for their PhDs, their transition to sustainability and theoretical and evidence-wise is quite fraught and problematic. So it's no wonder that trying to teach sustainability, it's always a moving space as well. It's quite problematic. So what I thought I'd do today is quickly go through some ideas about SDGs. Now, a few years ago, when SDGs came out in 2015, many of us in this space started to advocate that we should have this as part of our curriculum and teaching. And this is a slide here from RMIT, which arguably is the best sort of litmus test for what's happening in business in Australia and SDGs. Top 150 companies over the last 3 years, they've done studies to look at the uptake of SDGs, and as part of, and it comes down to objectives and reporting. That's the bottom line in my books in terms of trying to have a deep strategy in an organisation. As one good indicator, and you can see there's a massive uptake in the type of uptake in businesses and SDGs, which includes climate action. I think in this report there's 27 out of 150 have actually reached their net zero emission targets. So things are moving quickly in business. So we're on the right pathway years ago when we started to try and put SDGs in our curriculum. We've done a great job of trying to do that. And it's a work in progress, and that's sort of what I'm presenting today. Okay, so some questions I thought about. What do we need to think about in GBS here? How do we know if all SDGs are taught for all students? I think we're getting close to that. I'm not going to answer all of these. These are more posed as rhetorical questions, really. How do we know if they know how to meaningfully contribute to the SDGs in the discipline area when they graduate? How does GBS know if students know how to use it strategically in organisations? And how do we know if students have an impact using this framework in the discipline in the future? And we have AOL processes there. So the second last point is probably okay. And does GBS have a position on the SDGs in relation to sustainability and social responsibility? I put that up there because in the previous session with BSI, Business Strategy and Innovation Department, we talked about program learning objectives in the new ones that are coming out in GBS as well. And there's probably a little bit of work there that might need to be done as well. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about today. A few things to get through in 10 minutes. So many of you know about the SDGs. This is what Griffith's putting up this time round, 7 of them, quite a lot. That was what was put up. We're actually going to pare that down this next time because it was too much to put up, but essentially we're aiming to do all SDGs sometime in the future. We need to be able to resource that. How does that relate to education? I've drilled into those metrics. And there are 2 areas, obviously SDG number 4, but it doesn't really relate to really what we want to do as educators in a business school or health or education or wherever, because a lot of them are metrics of the university, not necessarily metrics of teaching. And I noticed some of us here were talking about some courses that actually do this in terms of partnerships. And because of this metric, I volunteered and jumped into community internships, which is the university-wide community internships, because I knew that that would be a great course if we could couch it with SDGs to be able to hit this metric. And that's the reason why I'm doing that. So I'm doing a guest lecture on Monday and Tuesday next week in that to try and help hit that metric and have a university course that's actually called Sustainable Development Goals in the title. So that's a great thing that Faith and the team there are doing. How do we bring this to life? We haven't got the portal yet in the university, but it's coming. There'll be a portal where we can upload things that we're doing in this space. How are we going to do it? Okay, so yeah, so a bit of an overview. We still actually have an hour left. Luckily, we've got an hour and a half for a TCoP. Maybe someone knew that there was going to be half an hour of tech issues before we started. Well done, Naomi. Yeah, so how do we know that we're doing a good job? And I'm just making sure I'm in the right place. Yeah, so SDGs, the thing that I was saying there at the end there is that there's a chance for us to upload excellent things we're doing in relation to the SDGs and the targets. So we can actually have a report that is excellent and very expansive. So the university is doing away with sustainability reports, and we're going for an SDG report in future, which is really good news. The next thing, so that's something that drives us along in terms of SDGs in the university. The next thing in the business school that drives us along is the sharing information on progress. And every 2 years, as part of the United Nations Principles of Management Education, Responsible Management Education, we have to put these reports in. And you might have seen that one that Vanessa Tavares did last year. That was our report. It's a great report documenting all the great things we're doing in that space. However, the gold standard or the top universities are given awards for their reports, and this is one of them. And the reason why, I drill down why they're actually doing a really great job over there is because of the way that they've set up their strategic plan of the business school. And they have high-level, ambitious aspiration targets, and then they have the sub-targets. Whereas at Griffith, they have the sub-targets are our sort of larger targets. We do have values that we aspire to, but there is actually some things in between that the business school here, in my opinion, has missed. And I think that that's one thing. And the other thing is that about the reporting is that it's forward focused as opposed to backwards focused. The reporting that seems to get the gold standards in PRME are the ones that actually use it as a driving strategy. For example, in our report, we went through with Vanessa and I went through and had a look to see how we could map out our activities after we saw what had been done. Obviously, we do have some forward strategic activities, PLOs being one of them, the new PLO standard. But they also have a transparent, critical and progressive approach to their reporting in there. So if you dive into that, you can see things here on that page that we could learn a lot in terms of, using these principles, critical, transparent and progressive, and not just giving a statement of what we did looking backwards. So there's something we could do. I always think about the working group that I was on years ago when I was on the working group to submit the Griffith graduate attributes, and I will admit that I probably didn't push hard enough as a sustainability advocate there, and we only have social responsibility in their communities there. Whereas really, if anyone would do that this day and age, you would have social responsibility and sustainability engaged in their communities. So, I always look back on that and think, that was one of those moments where I probably should have pushed harder on that, but here we are, and we're still doing it. In terms of the Griffith program design principles, we've got a few things in there that can help us to try and push things forward in terms of this space. So that's all good to check out as well.
It's not so prominent in the course design. So, you know, if teaching and learning people out there that have anything in terms of reviewing this, we may want to think about how we want to put SDGs or sustainability or other considerations, not just locally and globally connected, as something there. These things help us, I think, in terms of giving us a voice when we're in a particular meeting, saying, oh, but don't we need to consider this? And then you can say, well, it's part of design processes, etc. With the new EQUIS, I've checked out that and to see if SDGs are there. SDGs aren't really there in EQUIS. There's good things in there in terms of sustainability and social responsibility, and it all boils down to the appropriateness of the objectives and intended learning outcomes, so which is judged by the business school. So sustainability is there, but not necessarily for SDGs. However, in AASCSB, and this is a linkage to the PRME group as well. I know PRME at the international level are talking with that AASCSB in terms of accreditation, and then that's being sort of pushed there. At the moment, it's only guidelines in the standards, the SDGs, but it's moving towards not just a guideline, but actually being part of a standard. So with our shift, the PLO to SDGs is a good thing because it's ahead of the game. What are other business schools doing? One of the key people to watch in this space to give you an idea of what's happening in SDGs across the world is Giselle, who's actually living in Western Australia and is part of the Australia PRME group. Even though she's not actually a university lecturer, she actually has a blog site and is a consultant advising on education. And she's got some great examples. I'll share these slides here, but other business schools are getting right into it and, you know, not thinking them as values, but targets is pretty important. Trying to live and breathe them, not doing it alone, needing partnerships, and connecting out to people outside the institution. We did a bit of work last 2017 with the centre, and we did an audit of all undergraduate programs and their majors for the coverage of SDGs, and the numbers there you can see are the different majors back then and the number of SDGs that were present in the course profiles, and that's reflective of the keyword searches using Sustainable Development Solution Network keywords, and also some other additions we thought we could add in. But it wasn't, you know, the normal audit where you look at practiced, taught and assessed. And we'll talk more about what could happen in the future. I've actually published based on that in the Journal of Business Ethics. Yeah.
Rob, I was just wondering, because the supply chain and logistic has got more implications for SDGs, and because it's 2017, I'm not sure how it has changed over time.
Yep.
But because I was assuming supply chain and logistic, you know, having more implications on sustainability and SDGs, but looking at the top,
yep,
and having less coverage on SDGs, it just
that's exactly right. And I think that the fact that this conversation is happening, that's what this is really great for. When in 2017 and in 2018, when this data came out and we started to share it in the TCoP, we started to have conversations based on looking at that. We didn't actually action it in terms of going to a course convener or program director to say, what are you doing with this? Because it would be too much.
So we ask them to have this term like SDGs or sustainability.
Yeah, and that is a question too that I posed earlier, the relationship with sustainability and also SDGs, because we actually included sustainability keywords from the Australian Teaching and Learning Standards for Sustainability that came out in 2015. So we included those keywords in there as well. So we actually caught and map those onto SDGs as well.
Yeah, because I taught 2 courses of Peter Tutham. I mean, he developed those courses, and I remember there was lots of content on sustainable supply chain.
Yes.
But no reference to SDGs.
That's right. Well, at that point, but even the keywords, like if you're interested in a particular thing, like reducing inequalities and those types of keywords, of which there, I don't know how many, 20 or 30 keywords relating to that SDG, it'll come up if it's part of the content. So it's not necessarily SDGs. That's the other thing too, is like now we have courses actually teaching SDGs. So whereas we didn't when we had this in 2017. Okay, so that is the conversation now we're at. I think we've got a PLO that has SDGs in it. We've, helped Steffi with the MBA, and they've mapped the MBA in terms of SDGs and assisted the conveners there. They've done some work there. We've also done a lot of work in terms of SDGs on the foundation program, which everybody probably knows about. But we're sort of at the stage now where I think we do need to think about this a bit more systematically, and there's a great document here, Commonwealth Education Policy Framework, that looks at each SDG, and it gives prompting questions about knowledge, skills, and values. And I think I just ran out of battery.
On mine?
It's from.
I've got a
We just finished looking at it.
I emailed them to you. I've just emailed them to you.
Unless this works for you on your HP.
Oh, I can't believe that. There it is.
Yeah, there should
But
be
have
one
you
there.
got one of
No,
those?
that's
No, it's the wrong kind.
I just emailed them to you.
Yeah.
The slides are still up.
Because I think that when you you share, it uploads on
Yeah.
Teams.
I guess so.
So see if you can maybe keep.
Keep going.
Continue.
Yeah, but it's also.
That's true, actually. Yeah, it does upload a copy.
Okay.
As long as it can hear us.
So Naomi again and Anne, because I can see you there. Naomi and Anne,
Yeah.
you can hear? Great. You can see me? Rachel? Yes? Okay, I can't hear. Okay. So next steps is thinking about these types of documents as prompts for how we might want to teach. There's also UNESCO SDG learning objectives, how we might want to teach this systematically, because we're probably going to now enter into the SDG wash phase, where we overload students with SDGs. And we've got to make sure that we don't do that. So that's actually thinking about impact and where it actually lands. As to where we sit, GBS, I would say years ago we were at the top of the pack. Now I would say that we're not. We're down a little bit. We're still doing well, but we're not up at the top. And that's part of my mission, is to try and bring us up to the top again. And we have to do some systematic work. How we do that? I mean, I might have a crystal ball, but I also don't have the power to be able to do that. And it's really a collective approach and also a leadership approach that needs to be happening. Great. And there's some questions. Hazel, yes, I hope so. I think I'm going to be doing a little bit of work there, and others joining in there. And Naomi, do we have the 22 results based on data before the revised batch of business? Yes, that 2017 data is before. So the idea, and Jeff is in the room here, Jeff Ebbs, a PhD student, and also a sessional academic here for many years at Griffith, has kindly volunteered to do an audit. So we're going to repeat the audit, and we're going to see the change, and we'll have a good news story to be able to see all the changes that's happened in the last few years, because there are quite a significant amount. And that's it from me. Shall we have the three presentations, and then I've got Rachel's slides are up next.
Shall I just charge on?
Yes, I think we can do that.
All right, good. Everyone can hear me and see me okay? Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I will be talking about my experiences, how we have embedded the SDGs into two foundations courses that I've taught. One of them is Engaging Australia and the Asia Pacific, and one of them is The Purpose of Business. So with the way that we've embedded it, we've done it in two ways, one in the assessment tasks and then also just in our classroom activities. So can I get you to jump to the next slide, please, Rob? Thank you. Okay, so with Engaging Australia and the Asia Pacific, the assignment task that they had, and I've got a little screenshot of them on the next slide, theirs was a written task. We gave them the opportunity to choose 2 countries in the Asia Pacific, and then they chose 2 SDGs. Whichever SDGs they liked, and I'll talk to you about the benefit of doing that soon. And then the students needed to critically analyse any issues that the countries were facing in moving to achieving that SDG, and then any opportunities that the 2 countries had in being able to achieve those SDGs. And they did a bit of a compare and contrast for them to be able to really critically analyse the progress that was happening. And in the Purpose of Business course, we embedded the SDGs into their assignment 2, and we got them to map the SDGs on a business value chain. So it was a little bit more of a visual process where they mapped the positive and the negative impacts that a chosen business has on the SDGs. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I've got an example of what the value chain map looks like. So this is a real life example of a student. So we pretty much give them a stock standard value chain, and this is a really similar value chain used in a lot of documents where the SDGs have been analysed on value chains. The students then figure out, okay, which SDGs are relevant for my business, and they do this. We do this kind of with them in class. They don't work on their assignments in class, but we kind of give them the background information into what the SDGs are and how certain SDGs are more relevant to a particular type of business. You can see here that the student has positively mapped, which is indicated by the upwards arrow, the SDGs that this chosen company has on their impact is positive on those SDGs, and the downward arrow indicates a negative impact that the business has. So as well as submitting this, they also submit then some written justification for why they've put those SDGs at that particular place on the value chain. And next slide, please. And then this one doesn't obviously look as interesting, but this is what it looks like in Engaging Australia and the Asia Pacific. It's a written essay where the student is critically analysing the SDGs. So on my next slide, I'll talk to you about what works well in these assignment tasks and maybe what doesn't work well. So in these assignment tasks, the good thing about both of them is that the students have the freedom to choose the SDGs that they want to examine. We do activities with them in class that really allows the students to choose SDGs that they feel they connect with. If they're particularly passionate about something, if they're particularly interested in something, the assignment lets them choose which SDGs to focus on, which I've found to be a benefit because the student has a level of interest into what they're doing. The tasks both prompt critical analysis, especially from first year students. I feel like in first year courses, it can be really hard to stimulate that critical thought process. The SDGs have, I feel, actually made that a little bit easier. And I'll go through a couple of the class activities soon and show you how we kind of encourage them to critically think about the SDGs. And I've also noticed that students who get the SDGs, which is usually the students who attend class and who do reasonably well, when I then see them in another course, so I've had a really clear example. I had a student take Engaging Australia and the Asia Pacific in T3 and now re-enrolled with Purpose of Business in T1. And we weren't even talking about the SDGs, and the student is naturally bringing up the SDGs in conversation to responses to questions that we're posing. So when a student gets them, they are a really useful guideline or framework for them to latch onto in enabling them to connect with other course content that we teach them. On the next slide, I'll talk you through some challenges that we've had. So one challenge is that students sometimes do a bit of a surface level overview of the SDGs. They'll look them up online, but they won't bother to look at SDG targets and indicators, which means that sometimes they kind of incorrectly understand what the SDG is about. A really common misconception that I see all the time is that students think that climate action equals air pollution, but there's actually a more relevant SDG target for air pollution in SDG 3 that the students often overlook. So little things like that, redirecting them to the right area. But in a way, it does show us which students are engaging properly with the SDGs and which are just taking them for face value. That kind of ties into the next point. Students just read the title of the SDG and think that they understand it, whereas once they go in and read the targets and the indicators, they have a much better idea and they're able to then do the critical analysis. For students that don't attend class, which we have, as you probably all know, they struggle with the SDGs because they're big. They're hard to understand if you don't have anyone guiding you through the process. So for students who don't attend, they don't do particularly well in the assignments, but I feel like that's probably not an exception to the rule. It just shows that they don't have a very deep understanding of the SDGs. So then on the next slide, I've got some ways that we've embedded the SDGs into workshop activities. And this is the whole reason we're able to embed it into the assignment, is because we're teaching them how to use the SDGs in the workshops. So we use a tool called the SDG dashboard, which is a student favorite. I have students randomly messaging me outside of the trimester saying, "Hi, Rachel, I'm telling my friend about the SDGs. Can you please send me the SDG dashboard?" So they enjoy this visual tool. We also use an activity where we encourage the students to think about the flow-on impact of not achieving an SDG. We do a lot of case study analysis where we'll give them examples of businesses and get them to then analyze what SDGs does this business have a positive impact on. We usually try and get like leading businesses or really innovative businesses to kind of inspire the students. And then my last point there is that the explanation of the SDGs from the tutor is probably what I find to be one of the most critical things in getting the students to connect with the SDGs. So I've got some visual examples of all the things I just mentioned. So we can probably head through, if you go to the next slide for me, please, Rob. This is what the SDG dashboard looks like. It shows you in like a traffic light system which countries are progressing well. I've just given an example of the SDG 1, no poverty. Which countries are green, which means they are progressing positive, they've achieved it. And then it shows you the orange and red that there's challenges that remain. Grey areas don't have information, but it's just a really useful visual tool for students to realize the impact, I think, on a global level, particularly in the Engaging Australia and the Asia Pacific course. We get a really big student reaction when we click on like actually any of the SDGs and they realize that not a lot of achievement has happened. So say we click on, you know, SDG 12 and they see how much red is on the map. It's a really good, impactful visual tool. The students kind of go, "Oh my God," and you see it in the chat if you're online, or you see their faces in class kind of drop and go, "Oh wow," like it helps them to connect with it because it's a big issue. On the next slide, I've got an example of what we ask the students to do with flow-on impact. This to me is what prompts the students to maybe latch onto the SDGs a little bit more. So we'll be talking about an SDG and I'll let them choose one that they like. And then it takes them a while to get this activity. So it's maybe a 15 to 20-minute activity in our longer workshops, which is 2 hours. And I'll say to the students, I need you to now unpack the flow-on impact. If we don't achieve SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, what happens? So then they kind of map out, well, if we're not achieving that, then we have a lack of access to drinking water, which then leads to not achieving good health and well-being. And at the end of this activity, most of the students have realized how interconnected the SDGs are, which kind of, it helps them realize how important they are and the importance of achieving them, but it also helps them to realize that a small impact can have a positive flow-on impact. So if you are achieving SDG 6, that also has a positive impact on achieving SDG 3. They like this activity because it helps them tie all the 17 SDGs together, because when they first learn about it, 17 SDGs is big to take in. On the next slide, I've got just a really quick example of how we ask them to examine businesses. The business examples I've got for you on the slide, the Flow Hive one there, it's an Australian business where they've innovated the beekeeping process. So we get them to look at the business Flow Hive and unpack what positive impacts is this having on the SDGs. Or another example is Boy Smells, which is a gender neutral brand that does candles and fragrances. And we just get them to really think about the SDGs, go into the SDG targets and indicators and show any alignment between these businesses that are doing really cool things and the SDGs. And then the last slide, which is probably the thing that I just find super important, is how we as educators talk to the students about the SDGs. And I was lucky because when I first learned about the SDGs, it was through Rob, and Rob like sat me down and taught me about the SDGs and why they were so important. So I latched onto them. And I think if we can explain to students why they are important, why we personally like the SDGs. I share with the students my personal favorite SDGs, the ones I can connect to, the ones that I feel I have an impact on, the ones that I feel are most relevant to me in my life. And I encourage the students to do the same. Then the students kind of link it to themselves and they use you as an example to attach themselves to the SDGs. I also try to frequently just be observant of what's going on in the world around me. For example, I was at the movies the other day and the new Suncorp Bank campaign came on, which is putting your money where it matters. And so I share this with the students. I'll send it in a link in a group chat and just encourage the students to think about how is this, really big business trying to maybe connect with the SDGs, or can you see a positive impact this might have on the SDGs? And this ad particularly focuses on climate action, so there's a clear link there. So I think bringing the SDGs up all the time, not as just this week it's SDGs and we never talk about them again, but that we embed it all the time, like it's part of the conversation. The students use it in conversation, they use it when they're doing module discussions and getting involved. On to my next slide, what works well, although I feel like I might have already covered a few of these things. Again, the students in class have freedom to analyse SDGs that interest them. The class discussion stimulates a lot of the student passion and interest. And students enjoy critical discussions of socio-cultural issues in class. By teaching them about the SDGs, we, in a way, give them an avenue to discuss issues they want to discuss. They want to talk about climate action. They want to talk about the inclusion and celebration of our LGBTIQA+ communities. They want to talk about gender equality. So the SDGs, in a way, give us a tool to just stimulate those conversations in class. On the next slide, there's a few challenges that do arise when we are teaching them. Disengaged students won't connect, but again, this isn't really anything abnormal to any content. I would have a hard time getting a disengaged student to connect with any content, so the SDGs goes along with that. One challenge I have found is students who have an established career, who are maybe not interested in the SDGs, they can have a hard time connecting. So for a younger cohort of students, and particularly in our first year courses, there's heaps of high school leavers. In that instance, I'm preaching to the choir. They care so much. They want to talk about all these issues. But if someone's established in a career and they haven't ever used the SDGs, I have seen students struggle a little bit more connecting to the SDGs or the relevance of them if they haven't had to use them in their day-to-day work environment. And I have had as well, for example, children of successful business people, if their parents have a shareholder view to doing business that child has then adopted, that as well, it just is a little bit harder to get the student to connect with it and really grasp it. But having said that, there's usually so much student engagement and class discussion that it doesn't take long for the students to kind of share with each other and learn from each other and the connection that they're forming with the SDGs. And on my last slide, hopefully I've summarised it well. In summary, I've generally just found, honestly, the students love the SDGs. It's definitely something they want to talk about. One thing I always say to the students is like, wow, I'm so impressed. And I genuinely am. The students come to class and they really deeply care about the earth. They care about equality. They care about justice. They care about ethics. So this just gives them the tools to be able to connect it with theory, to connect it with their learning, and to give their passions a little bit of a format so they can talk about the things that they love and the things that they're passionate about through the SDGs. Like I mentioned, once they connect with the SDGs, they usually don't let them go. They just talk about them all the time. I remember doing that in my first year. It wasn't the SDGs, but I found a theory that I loved and I mentioned it all the time. Well, I find students do the same with the SDGs. Students have a lot of personal goals. Even in their first weeks, they'll say, I really want to start my own business where I promote climate justice or whatever. Like, they know what they want and they're passionate. And so the SDGs, it's honestly just, for me, been a tool to let them speak about their passions, but to bring it to the business context and give it a lot of content. So that's what I found so far, and I'm definitely happy to answer any questions either now or maybe if you wanted to save them until the end, Rob.
Yeah, let's wait till the end. That's fantastic to hear that. I haven't heard a lot of that either. I mean, I know you and I would talked about how it's going to happen in foundations, and I was helping Amanda write up that with other people, and particularly Purpose of Business, write that course up just to give some content. So it's amazing to see how that's developed.
Yeah, no, it's been really good.
Yeah, and the other thing, we're just getting the presentation up, and I'll just keep talking here. The other thing that Rachel and I and Professor Susan Harris-Rimmer are doing is doing analysis of SDGs across all local governments in Australia at the moment. And we've found that there's probably only about 5% of local governments that actually use SDGs in any form across Australia. So it's interesting to compare that to business, where you've got the top companies really going for it. And, you know, if you're not part of SDGs as part of your reporting, you're going to get left behind in terms of, you know, competitiveness that happens in businesses with each other. So, yeah, it's really interesting how, you know, business is ahead of the game here in terms of government, which is, you know, I was very surprised when we saw those results there, Rachel. And it'd be really great to see what's going to happen with health. Yeah.
But while we're waiting, this is a really good, I think if we can start this teaching, learning of practice, SDGs, learning of practice, teaching, yes, it'll be fantastic. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good to go.
And Rachel, I stole your template from this morning because I had to put these together fairly quickly because what I was working on sort of got corrupted. So thank you. And yes, we did acknowledge First Peoples, and that, I think that's really important for what we're doing in health. And we're sort of trying to do two things at once, and that's embedding SDGs, but also trying to embed First Peoples knowledge and values. And we find that there's a lot of intersection across those two things. So, right, so embedding in SDGs into the health curricula, it's a work in progress, and I want to make a disclaimer here that I'm trying to give a snapshot, but I'm certainly not aware of everything that's happening across the whole health group. And as we sort of serendipitously come across people at teaching and learning forums, we find that they've been doing it for years, but we haven't sort of managed to corral them. We are finding them. I think the champions stand out. They're the ones who are going to learning and teaching forums. But I want to talk about, there's two things. There's strategic initiatives happening in health, and then there's opportunistic ones where individuals with a passion are just going ahead. They're not waiting for the strategic initiatives to come along. Next slide, please. So just within the health sector, I always think, I teach and I think in sort of nested hierarchies of systems. And within health, there's a strong mandate coming from the UN and the WHO, which is the health body within the UN system, that we derive mandates from. And a lot of my teaching, I'm trying to teach and empower students with saying, look, if no one's taking notice of what you're saying, draw on these international mandates saying it's not me saying it's important, the UN is saying it's important, the WHO is saying it's important. Then we've also got international academic networks, and then, anyway, next slide, these will become, oh, sorry, go back up again, one more. Yeah. So at that international level, I just combined it, one more back, yeah, that one. So at that international level is, the health sector is engaging with academia and it's engaging with the industry. So the health industry is huge, you know, that the healthcare industry is huge. Oh, can't they hear us? Can you hear us, Rob? We can't hear you. Can you hear us?
It's all good. I just shifted position.
Oh, it's okay. I thought you were throwing your hands up in the air saying we couldn't hear us. Okay.
You're not moving yet.
So when we, so a lot of the health group, they are training health professionals to work in certain industries. So we try and keep an eye on what's happening in the healthcare industry as well as within the educational academia within health. And I'll go down. Yep. So long before the SDGs, I mean, the SDGs, we think about them as they've only been around since 2016, but the sustainability agenda, of course, goes way back. And in my teaching, I've been teaching about sustainability in health since 2003, and before that in overseas. And then the sort of language changes. But I find it's important to, in our teaching, to trace that history back and to let the students know this is nothing new and you're not reinventing the wheel. And I realised I'm teaching about global events that they weren't even born yet, so, but I think it's important to give that sort of historical perspective, and that this is where we're at now. It's the decade of action, and we really have this goal of trying to reach these SDGs by 2030. So I think the SDGs are remarkable for engaging the young and, well, all practitioners, because it's more relevant, they've got specific targets and objectives, and it makes our job easier. But I just wanted to mention this global consortium on climate change and health. In the health sector, I'd say that there's been more of a focus perhaps on the climate change element and health than there has been on the SDGs. But that's when you go in, this is a consortium that was set up by, I'm going to get it wrong, Columbia University in the US. And when we're a member, Griffith University is a member of this global consortium. And that's been the ticket to get it into like the medical curriculum. So I was on a medical dean's working group for climate change and health, which reported to the accrediting body for medical degrees. And we figure if you want to get people to put it into their degrees, address the accrediting bodies, the health accrediting bodies. And our research that we've been doing over the last couple of years in this sort of teaching space highlighted that any of the health professional degrees, we work with individual academics and their courses, but we really work with our professional associations and sort of trying to, so many of us are involved very highly with our accrediting bodies. And some of us sit, like I wrote the accreditation guidelines for environmental health, so I know I can put them in there. And then when you start mapping how you embed SDGs and sustainability into your curriculum, and you say, well, even to the university, I use it to push down into the university, sort of saying, we have to do it because we won't get our accreditation unless we do. So it's sort of top down and bottom up. I think we need to have that curriculum. But statements like this by the WHO that in 2015, they called for mainstreaming climate change and health topics into medical and public health training. So that's what we draw on, these sort of mandates when we push it to the medical accrediting bodies and things, saying, look, it's taken a year, there's a lag. Of course, this was set in 2015. Right. So within the health professional bodies, they're the other big driver. And for example, CAFIA is the Council of Academic Public Health Institutions of Australia. And we held, there's teaching and learning forums every year, and the last one was held on the Sunshine Coast. And our core themes for that was to try to co-create robust public health curricula across Australasia to prepare a bold and agile workforce that leads public health action for an equitable and sustainable future. So that equitable and sustainable was addressing that equitable, very much that first people's knowledge and values, and the sustainable was all about the SDGs. So it was a really vigorous sort of debate, and it was that thing about the SDGs align with and elevate core public health principles. So to me, when we go back to our what does public health and public and environmental health stand for, they're so easily reflected in the SDGs and the social determinants of health, the biophysical determinants of health. So it was an easy sell to public health, and our trouble was we've been doing it already. This is our core business, so why do you have to label it as SDGs? And we're trying to now say, well, we need it embedded across all public health courses, not just the big picture ones about social determinants. So when we teach epidemiology, what are the ways in which how we teach epidemiology is all about, it's not empowering, it's showing what's wrong, so there's easy picks, the low-hanging fruit, and then there's the harder ones. And I'd say across the health group now, so if we go down to, within Griffith Health, we managed to get the executives' support for, we've got a working group called Sustainability Initiatives within the health groups called SCI, and that's been going for some time, and it was led by Annalise Donovan, who's now at PBC. And she stepped aside and Jennifer Bodie and myself step up as co-chairs. And Jennifer is the Deputy Head of School Teaching and Learning within the social work. No, the name of her school was from School of Health Sciences and Social Work. So they changed all of our school names last year. But so we decided last year and this year to really make SDGs the focus of our working group and sort of saying, rather than smattering across many different priorities, let's really go for this, what we can do and what are the challenges. And we applied for a teaching and learning grant with the aim of increasing awareness of the SDGs, but also training staff. So raising awareness amongst all health staff. So not just the ones who think it's easy, but across all the health schools about the SDGs and about then developing resources and helping work with people in there, particularly program leaders. So now we've got reps from, we've expanded this working group to have representatives from all of the 5 schools, and we've included student reps as well, because like Rachel said, they're the passionate ones who are sort of saying, look, we want this and we're hungry for it. So we've developed a online module, which is sort of that we hope that can be used as sort of a digital badge at some point. We're talking to Rob about how we can do this more collectively, but it's very much raising awareness and letting people dive down into little things, and but then gathering the program directors and sort of saying, look, we're happy to work with you. So we've got these champions, the reps on this committee from each school. We'll work with you to sort of help see how we can map it. So there's individuals already doing great things within courses. Some of us have been doing it for a long time, but what I've learned through curriculum development is that we don't want students to get sick of, oh, it's the SDGs again, you know. So it's that, how do we introduce it? How do we further develop it? And then how do we consolidate their understanding of it throughout the curriculum? And so we don't want that. And that's what worries me sometimes about how we do the auditing or mapping of who's doing what in SDGs, because you can throw the SDG label onto all your slides, or you can put it into your topics without really engaging much in it. And other courses, they're deeply embedding core values of SDGs, but they're not using the logos. So if you're only doing a search, whether they've mentioned them or not, because the way we word our learning and learning objectives is driven by accreditation guidelines, and they may not mention SDGs, but they're core things about systems thinking and problem solving and sustainability, and then the way we do it is via the SDGs. So I just want to highlight a couple of examples. So this is where I ran out of time, and I apologise because I don't have nice colourful slides, but Jennifer Bodie within her school has started a mapping of all schools within that, all courses within that school, and there's a lot of them apparently. And they've sort of developing these little amoeba diagrams as to whether it's sort of low, medium or higher levels of engagement with the SDGs. I've stood back from doing that because if she's, their group was talking to each of the course conveners, but if you don't understand them yourself, you don't really know whether you're doing it much, how much you're doing it. So we're trying to, within medicine, it's more structured because I was on that working group, and we're working on how to not just, we've got a theme in doctor and health in the community, which is clear to make it relevant to SDGs and climate change. But then we're trying to make it relevant to clinical practice. And there's so many different ways through their problem-based learning sort of modules. So there are champions within the medical school that are happy to do that. Within our goal within SCI, after we raise awareness, is to develop a second module, which is a whole bunch of resources for the health professions. So particularly those involved in professional training, how do we embed learning objectives that align with their accreditation? So finding the alignment and then giving them access to a whole bunch of resources that they can draw on in their own way within their courses. And we're up to that stage now. So within environmental and public health, I can give you just a little tiny snapshot. There's no more slides, but I can tell you that in the introduction to environmental health, they choose their own topics, and like Rachel, I think it's important that once we give a big picture, we give them a choice of topics in environmental health, and their role is to see how they align with the SDGs and practical examples to showcase it. But their task is to produce a 1,500 word sort of critical essay, but also an infographic about the key messages of how the importance of the SDGs to improving health outcomes within these areas. So it is, the first thing we want to show them is that it's simply not just SDG 3, which is the good health and well-being. And then in other courses we do smatterings, but then in my course it's climate change and public health. It's inherited that heading, but it could easily be SDGs and health. And that's more where we're looking at global environmental health trends, environmental trends, and the health consequences of those trends, and then strategies to address them. And they have to map the SDGs with everything, every topic that we look at. And what the technique we're using is mind mapping. So because it is through a complex systems lens, they'll have a look at the issue, and then they have to mind map which SDGs they link and how the SDGs link to each other to address that problem. But then they have to convert it to action to say their results. The other assignment is they have to produce ministerial briefs that why do these SDGs belong on the health agenda? So it might be something about the decline in harvest fisheries, and should we be using aquaculture to address that? And that's been debated in Parliament, but you're preparing a brief for the Health Minister. Why is that a health issue? And drawing on that health mandate to act on the SDGs. So I think that's an angle that resonates with a lot of the health professions is people listen to health professionals, they listen to your doctor. So if we can add the health argument to addressing each of the SDGs, not just one of them, then we'll make headway. But yeah, so there's lots of other things I know in nursing, they're doing a lot. And Naomi Tatucci, she's linked up with colleagues in Germany and England and a big project over there. And they once again get students to drive down deep and work on case studies. And so a number of different strategies. But Rob, I'm really keen to, if we can get more discussion about how we do this systematically and develop tools we can all use and share our experiences and have an input into each other's courses, I think we'd get some fabulous leverage. That's it. I think, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I'd finished, but I'll just show one example. This is just one example of, so we're presenting at health-based teaching and learning forums, and this is ANSIPI, and what I was doing with the Medical Deans Working Group. So there are lots of poster displays that you talk to, but you'll see the strategy there is actually theory-based, so about aligning with professional standards and accrediting bodies we found to be one of the most effective strategies, and about preparing health professionals. So yeah, I think the struggle I've got with now is some of the individual disciplines within health saying, oh, that's fine for you guys to do, it's got nothing to do with pharmacy though. So until we found our champions within each school, and then we're working, it's interesting that it's often the student associations of those professional groups that are pushing their parent professional association. So it's the pharmacy students' statement about sustainable development goals. So they're pushing up from below. And yeah, this was just an example of within health that we're having that strategy of introduce, further develop and consolidate so that they don't get sick of it. And that's it. But there's a lot more I didn't cover, but I'm very keen to sort of showcase the stuff throughout the year as we get better at it. That's it, Rob. Back to you.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And really amazing to hear, perspective from health and seeing what you're doing. And it's amazing to hear, the champion approach and also, just hearing that, I think we do need to have a conversation about systematically do it. I don't think there's the silver bullet. It's like any curriculum design. It's quite a complex process. But one thing two things I'll quickly mention, because I know we're running out of time, aren't we? We finish up in 3 minutes officially. Is that in our sustainability committee and GBS sustainability committee, and health has one and science is developing theirs. They're a bit behind in that regard, but other groups have it as well. In the sustainability committee, we are progressing this second audit, but we haven't gone to the next step, which is what do we do then? And that's the conversation. Really, this is a kickstart for that conversation between all of us in GBS to think about how we want to do that. One concept that I've kicked around with a few people in the committee is this concept of threshold concepts. What are the things we want to teach in our discipline areas that people can't go back from once they learn about it? And how do they relate to SDGs? And because, you don't want 20 people talking about the threshold concept for poverty in 20 different courses. So it's sort of like, who's going to be doing what and at what level, and that's a joined up conversation between a lot of people. And I'm not going to try and say how we should do that, but that's something I'd like to see happen. Yeah, and it's great having those perspectives, and it's really great from Rachel to see, that it works, that students are really engaged in the first year, because we're all wondering when we're making that course, we're thinking, what's going to happen? How is this going to land with first years? So that's really positive. And I know I'm just talking here and there's questions, but I thought I better do a quick wrap up. Is there anything else you want to say, Rachel?
No, I'm good. I think I captured it. Happy to answer any questions, though, if there's any.
Yeah. In 1 minute.
59, 58.
There is a meeting here, a question in the chat, and if you don't mind, are you using a digital tool for that mind mapping? And maybe also, Rachel, because you have an impact map, if there's a tool for that as well. So Anne, is there a tool?
Students are so innovative. There are so many online mind mapping tools, and we leave it open. We sort of showcase some examples, but Tony Buzan's IMAP tool is one we sort of started with, but they use so many different ones. It's amazing. Their audience there, they can choose and nominate their audience in the third year classes. Are they talking to students? Are they talking to industry? Are they talking to the fishermen's lobby? So the groups can actually choose. But the thing is, how do you effectively communicate the urgency?
Yeah. I've even seen in business case studies where project management occurring where you've got a whole team and then the team actually maps how they affect each other and how they affect each other in terms of SDGs. So each person has their own sort of SDG map and the relationships to the rest of the project team delivering a manufactured good or something. Yeah, so there's a lot of innovative stuff happening out there.
And Rob, a lot of this was done with sustainability teaching at Griffith a decade ago.
Yeah.
And they developed that big manual of tools that you can use to teach sustainability.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we should build on that.
You can even go back to the web of life approach where you have your wool between each color. You've got a circle of 7. You could have 17 people with wool going across and work out all the relationships, and that's what we do. John Feenan.
That's it. Exactly.
Taught us 24 years ago about all that stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Let's pull it out of the closet.
Yeah.
Christy, do you see any other question in the chat that you'd like to bring through, or?
I don't, and I just wanted to say a general apology for the technical hiccups, folks. I'm certainly planning on scheduling a multi-campus party and having a good practice before we do the next one. Maybe with wine it will go smoother.
Thanks for the invite, and I hope that we can keep this up and keep on sharing across.
Absolutely. We'll send you all the details of our TCoPs, but maybe something more specific again about the SDGs. Yeah.
And the other thing I forgot to mention also, Kimberly and Saffron with the sustainability team are facilitating the SDG strategy, and that's where Anne and I were talking as well in that group. So we're looking at, well, okay, what does that mean for the And that's probably where it should come from. And then that goes up and then comes down through the deans to be able to start having that joined up conversation. And we have also talked about us organically getting together and having an SDG teaching forum across the university, which we could just do anyway.
I think did we decide, Rob, to do that?
Yeah, we did, but then we lost energy over summer, just to be.
Yeah, no, we just started it again last week. Remember that email between you, me and Jenny? We said, yes, it's going to happen. Yep.
There is a point to note that Sean has actually said that in the Griffith Asia Institute, it's currently working with various UN agencies to support governments in the Asia Pacific region with programs which support the SDGs. Maybe that work could actually be used within students' real-world examples of how different institutions across the region are actively collaborating to support the goals. So maybe Sean could reach out to Rob and maybe talk about how GAI could actually become part of a discussion forum as well on this.
Yeah, that's right. And there's so many things happening in that space in GBS. It's incredible. And looking for this presentation, I've scanned the last few days of other business schools, seeing what they do and seeing the different platforms they've got to be able to share research, etc. And that does remind me of the ongoing review of the Centre for Sustainable Enterprise and the movement, I think, in that review, although I'm not the one to finally make the decision because it's, it's still in play, but it's tending towards more of an impact-oriented centre or entity for the business school and tending towards SDGs. But I'm not going to say it is going to be SDGs, but it would be amazing if something happened where there is a showcasing and facilitation of what actually is done, let alone thinking up what else we could do new, because there's so much stuff happening already. So yeah, that's another thing that we're.
Well, it might be a good. It might be a good idea to look at considering putting it on the agendas at higher level, at dean's level, at departmental level, learning and teaching level, as a standing item on one's agendas.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that's what we've decided to do within health. It's on our learning and teaching and research committee agendas. Yeah.
Cognizant of time, thank you everybody for coming along. I don't know if Christy's there, if she wants to wrap up, or I don't see her there beside you, Rob. Okay, but just to let you know that there is also an email gone out about your feedback on today's session. We have another session happening on the 12th of April, which is academic integrity, academic integrity, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yes.
that's what I'm doing.
Yes, with Heather here and Young Woo as the presenter. So we'll be sending out details on that very soon. And also, if you have ideas for further TCoP topics, please forward them to myself or Christy, and we will definitely have discussions. So thank you, everybody. Christy, last word?
Thank you so much, everyone. As I said in the chat, that was a really wonderful exchange of ideas, despite a few technical hiccups. Thanks especially to Naomi for all her hard work in putting this together, and to Anne for joining us, and our other two wonderful presenters. Great session.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.